The sun was setting on a quiet Thursday evening in suburban Atlanta, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Michelle, a 17-year-old high school senior, was driving home from her part-time job at the local library, her mind filled with thoughts about the upcoming college applications she needed to finish. She had spent the afternoon helping younger kids with their reading assignments, something that always brought a smile to her face. The radio played softly in the background as she carefully navigated her mom's old Honda Civic through familiar streets. She had saved up for months to help pay for the car's insurance, proud of her growing independence. Her natural hair was neatly tied back, and she wore her favorite library volunteer t-shirt, looking forward to getting home for dinner with her family. It was just another ordinary evening until red and blue lights suddenly flashed in her rearview mirror. Michelle's heart skipped a beat, but she remained calm, remembering everything her parents had taught her about dealing with law enforcement. She carefully pulled over to the side of the road, making sure to stop in a well-lit area near a busy convenience store. Following the safety steps her parents had drilled into her, Michelle turned off the engine, placed her hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen, and took slow, steady breaths. She had done nothing wrong. The car's registration was up to date, and she had been driving exactly at the speed limit. Through her side mirror, she watched as Officer Reynolds approached, his hand resting unnecessarily on his weapon. Something about his walk, his posture, sent a chill down her spine. This wasn't like the friendly Officer Chen who sometimes visited her school for safety talks. The way Officer Reynolds moved reminded her of a predator stalking its prey. License and registration, he barked before even reaching her window, his tone already hostile despite Michelle's complete compliance. She noticed he hadn't mentioned why he pulled her over. Wasn't that standard procedure? Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her documents, kept neatly in the glove compartment precisely for moments like this. "Sir, may I ask why you pulled me over?" Michelle asked politely, her voice steady despite her growing unease. The question seemed to aggravate Officer Reynolds, whose face hardened into a mask of authority and prejudice. "Your taillight's out," he snapped. Though Michelle knew this wasn't true. Her mom had just had the car checked last week, and Michelle had seen all the lights working in the reflection of a store window just minutes ago. The officer snatched her documents, studying them with exaggerated scrutiny. "Step out of the vehicle," he demanded, his tone leaving no room for question. Michelle's stomach churned with anxiety, but her mind remained clear. She pressed the emergency recording button on her phone, another safety measure her parents had insisted on, before carefully opening her door. The convenience store's security cameras were in full view, and several passers-by had slowed their pace, watching the scene unfold with concerned expressions. As she stood beside her car, Michelle could see her own reflection in the convenience store window. She looked so small next to Officer Reynolds, but she stood straight and dignified, just as her grandmother had taught her. She was an honor student, a volunteer, a daughter who made her parents proud. She had done nothing wrong, yet she could feel the weight of generations of similar encounters pressing down on her shoulders. The evening traffic continued to flow past them, cars slowing down as their drivers witnessed what was quickly becoming more than just a routine traffic stop. The sun had almost completely set now, and the street lights buzzed to life one by one, casting harsh shadows across Officer Reynolds' face as he circled her car like a vulture. Michelle's phone was still recording in her pocket as Officer Reynolds began his baseless interrogation. She answered each question clearly and respectfully, even as her heart raced and her palms grew sweaty. Years of family discussions about these situations echoed in her mind. Stay calm, be polite, remember your rights, and most importantly, make it home safely. Little did she know that this encounter was about to escalate far beyond anything she or her parents had prepared for. As more cars slowed to witness the scene, and the convenience store clerk stepped outside to watch, the first chapter of what would become a nationwide story was just beginning to unfold. In her pocket, her phone continued to record, capturing every word, every movement, every moment of what was supposed to be just another drive home from the library. The growing crowd of observers would soon become witnesses to an abuse of power that would shock the conscience of the community and spark a movement for change. Officer Reynolds stood at Michelle's car window, his flashlight beam unnecessarily bright as he shined it directly into her eyes. The light created harsh shadows across his face, making his expression even more intimidating. His badge number, which Michelle had carefully memorized, gleamed under the street lamps that now illuminated the growing scene. "I smell something suspicious," he declared, though the only scent coming from the car was the lavender air freshener Michelle's mom had bought last weekend. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and threatening. Michelle's heart pounded, but her voice remained steady as she responded, "Officer, I'm coming home from the library. I don't have anything suspicious in my car." The convenience store's lights cast a fluorescent glow over the scene, where more people had gathered to watch. A middle-aged woman in scrubs had stopped her car across the street, her phone clearly visible as she recorded the interaction. Two college students stood near the store's entrance, their concerned faces illuminated by the neon signs in the window. Officer Reynolds' reputation preceded him in their community. Just last month, he'd been the subject of a local news story about questionable traffic stops, though the department had quickly dismissed the complaints. Now, his actions seemed to follow a familiar pattern as he circled Michelle's car, his boots scraping against the pavement with each deliberate step. "Step out of the vehicle," he commanded again, this time with more force. Michelle could hear her grandmother's voice in her head, telling her to stay calm, to remember that she had rights, but also to be careful. She moved slowly, making sure her hands were visible at all times, just as her parents had taught her. The evening air had grown cooler, and Michelle wished she had grabbed her jacket before leaving the library. But the chill she felt wasn't just from the temperature, it was from the way Officer Reynolds watched her every move, like he was waiting for any excuse to escalate the situation. From her new position outside the car, Michelle could see more clearly how many people had stopped to witness what was happening. A city bus had slowed down as it passed, passengers pressing their faces against the windows. The convenience store clerk had stepped outside, pretending to sweep the sidewalk while keeping a watchful eye on the scene. "You match the description of someone we're looking for," Officer Reynolds claimed, though he couldn't provide any details when Michelle politely asked what description he meant. The statement was as transparent as it was familiar. A commonly used excuse that had been challenged countless times in their community. Michelle's phone continued recording in her pocket as Officer Reynolds began an aggressive line of questioning. Where had she been? Where was she going? Why was she in this neighborhood? Each answer she gave, clear, honest, and respectful, seemed to frustrate him more, as if her composure itself was an offense. Inside the car, her library volunteer badge lay on the passenger seat, along with a stack of children's books she was planning to read at next week's story time. Her college application essays were saved on her laptop in the backseat, including one about her dream of becoming a civil rights attorney like her father. The situation grew more tense with each passing minute. Officer Reynolds' hand kept returning to his weapon, a threatening gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the onlookers. Some had started to whisper among themselves, phones recording, faces showing a mix of concern and outrage at what they were witnessing. A young mother pulled her car into the convenience store parking lot, her two small children watching wide-eyed from the backseat. She stepped out, phone already recording, and stood with the other witnesses. There was strength in numbers, and each new observer added to the documentation of what was quickly becoming a clear case of harassment. Michelle thought about her parents, probably wondering why she was late for dinner. She thought about her younger brother, who would soon be old enough to drive himself. Would he have to face situations like this too? The weight of these thoughts pressed against her chest, but she stood tall, dignity intact. The air felt electric with tension as Officer Reynolds demanded to search her car. "I do not consent to a search," Michelle stated firmly, remembering the words her father had taught her. This seemed to be the response Officer Reynolds had been waiting for, his face darkening with barely contained anger. In the distance, another police car's sirens could be heard approaching. Michelle didn't know if this would make things better or worse, but she maintained her composure, even as her hands trembled slightly at her sides. The growing crowd of witnesses provided some comfort, their presence a silent testament to the fact that she wasn't alone. The next few moments would prove crucial, as Officer Reynolds' next actions would cross a line that even his fellow officers couldn't ignore. The small crowd of witnesses would soon become part of a larger story, one that would spark outrage and demand for change in their community and beyond. The second police car pulled up to the scene, its headlights cutting through the growing darkness. Officer Reynolds had already crossed a line, but what happened next would shock even his fellow officers. Without warning, he grabbed Michelle's wrists, the cold metal of handcuffs clicking into place before she could process what was happening. "You're being detained for suspicious behavior," he announced loudly, as if performing for the gathering crowd. The words echoed off the convenience store walls, mixing with the gasps and murmurs of the onlookers. Michelle's voice remained steady despite her racing heart as she asked, "What suspicious behavior, officer?" The new arrival, Officer Chen, stepped out of his patrol car with a concerned expression. He knew Michelle from his community outreach work at her high school, where she helped organize safety awareness programs. The disconnect between the honor student he knew and the suspicious person Officer Reynolds was describing was jarring. "I found this while searching the vehicle," Officer Reynolds declared, holding up an empty plastic bag he'd pulled from under the driver's seat. It was the kind of bag that could have held anything: lunch, school supplies, or nothing at all. Officer Chen's brow furrowed as he watched his colleague construct a narrative that didn't match the reality before him. The crowd had grown larger now. The convenience store's evening shift manager had come outside, recognition dawning on his face. Michelle often bought snacks there while tutoring kids at the library. A group of nurses from the nearby medical center had stopped on their way home from their shift, their scrubs still wrinkled from a long day of care. "My phone is recording everything," Michelle said calmly, though her voice carried a slight tremor. "And I can see at least 12 other people recording too." She was right. Phones were raised all around the scene, capturing every moment of this unlawful detention. The convenience store's security cameras whirred quietly above, adding another layer of documentation. Officer Reynolds seemed unfazed by the cameras. He began a theatrical search of Michelle's car, pulling out her backpack, scattering her carefully organized school materials across the seat. Her college application essays fluttered in the evening breeze, some falling to the ground where they were rescued by concerned onlookers. "She volunteers at my daughter's school," a woman in the crowd called out. "She reads to the kids every Tuesday." Others began to speak up too, sharing their own knowledge of Michelle's character. The community was bearing witness not just to an injustice, but to the stark contrast between Officer Reynolds' accusations and the truth they knew. Officer Chen stepped closer, his discomfort with the situation visible. "Reynolds," he said quietly, "maybe we should." But Officer Reynolds cut him off with a sharp gesture. "She's coming to the station," he declared, his voice carrying an edge of satisfaction that sent chills through the watching crowd. Michelle's phone continued recording in her pocket as Officer Reynolds led her toward his patrol car. She walked with dignity, head held high despite the handcuffs. The gathering of witnesses had grown to include people from all walks of life: store workers, medical professionals, parents, students, all united in their concern and outrage. "I'm calling your parents right now," the convenience store manager called out, already dialing. Others in the crowd were making calls too, to local news stations, to community leaders, to anyone who might be able to help. The story was spreading faster than Officer Reynolds could control it. The inside of the patrol car was cold and smelled of stale coffee. Through the window, Michelle could see Officer Chen speaking rapidly into his radio, his expression troubled. The crowd's voices were muffled now, but their presence remained a comfort. Dozens of witnesses to an injustice that was about to become a catalyst for change. As Officer Reynolds started the car, Michelle thought about her parents. Her father, a respected defense attorney, would know exactly what to do. Her mother, a community organizer, would already be mobilizing support. They had prepared her for moments like this, though they had hoped she would never need those preparations. The drive to the precinct was tense and silent. Officer Reynolds took a longer route than necessary, perhaps hoping the crowd would disperse before news of this incident reached his superiors. But in the age of social media and instant communication, the story was already spreading like wildfire through the community. Streetlights flashed rhythmically through the patrol car windows as they drove. Michelle focused on her breathing, just as her mother had taught her during difficult moments. In her mind, she carefully recorded every detail: the time, the route, Officer Reynolds' badge number, every word spoken. She knew that soon, very soon, these details would matter. The precinct building loomed ahead, its windows glowing in the darkness. Michelle couldn't know that in just a few minutes, this building would become the scene of an even more shocking abuse of power, one that would finally bring Officer Reynolds' actions into the harsh light of justice. The fluorescent lights of the police precinct buzzed overhead as Officer Reynolds led Michelle through the double doors. The evening shift desk sergeant looked up from her computer, her expression changing from routine boredom to concern as she took in the scene. A teenage girl in handcuffs, still wearing her library volunteer badge. "What's the charge?" the sergeant asked, her pen hovering over the intake form. Officer Reynolds muttered something about suspicious behavior and possible contraband, but his voice lacked the confidence it had shown at the traffic stop. The desk sergeant's eyes narrowed as she looked at Michelle's clean-cut appearance and calm demeanor. Two other officers in the precinct lobby stopped their conversation to watch. One of them recognized Michelle from the community center where she tutored elementary school students in math. The disconnect between the person they knew and the situation before them was jarring. "I need to search her thoroughly," Officer Reynolds announced, his voice carrying an unsettling edge. The desk sergeant started to say something about calling a female officer, but Reynolds cut her off. "I'm handling this my way." The words hung in the air like a threat. Michelle's heart raced, but she remembered her father's words. "Stay calm, stay dignified, and remember that the truth always comes to light." Her phone was still recording in her pocket, capturing every word, every sound, every moment of this escalating nightmare. The precinct's security cameras whirred quietly in their corners, their red lights blinking steadily. Later, these would become crucial evidence, but for now, they were silent witnesses to what was about to unfold. "Your hair," Officer Reynolds said suddenly, his voice filled with manufactured suspicion. "You could be hiding something in there." The absurdity of the accusation was clear to everyone in the room. Michelle's natural hair was neatly styled in a simple, professional manner, the same way she wore it every day to school and her volunteer work. The desk sergeant stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Officer Reynolds, I really think we should wait for..." But before she could finish, Reynolds had already grabbed a pair of precinct scissors from the desk. Time seemed to slow down. The other officers in the room appeared frozen, their faces showing a mix of shock and disbelief. The young officer whom knew Michelle from the community center reached for his radio, his hands shaking slightly as he called for a supervisor. "This is department protocol," Reynolds lied, though everyone present knew it wasn't. Nothing about this was protocol. Nothing about this was right. The desk sergeant had already picked up her phone, dialing numbers frantically. The first lock of Michelle's hair fell to the floor, and with it, tears finally began to roll down her cheeks. But she didn't make a sound. She stood straight and tall, just as her grandmother had taught her, her dignity unbreakable even in this moment of humiliation. Through the precinct's windows, emergency lights suddenly flashed in the parking lot. More cars were arriving. Someone had called for help. The desk sergeant was now speaking rapidly into her phone, her free hand covering her mouth in horror as she watched the scene unfold. The sound of the precinct doors bursting open echoed through the lobby. Michelle's parents rushed in, her father's legal briefcase in one hand, his phone recording in the other. Her mother's voice, strong and clear, cut through the chaos. "Stop this right now." Officer Reynolds turned, scissors still in hand, but the look of power on his face had already begun to fade. Behind Michelle's parents, more figures appeared in the doorway, community leaders, local news reporters, and the police chief himself, his face dark with anger. The chief's voice boomed through the lobby. "Officer Reynolds, put down those scissors and step away from her. Now." The authority in his voice left no room for argument. The scissors clattered to the floor, the sound echoing in the suddenly silent room. Michelle's mother rushed to her daughter, wrapping her in a protective embrace. Her father, a well-known civil rights attorney, was already documenting the scene, his legal training kicking in even through his parental outrage. The other officers in the room had moved to surround Reynolds, their earlier inaction replaced by clear purpose. The young officer who had called for help approached with handcuffs, his voice steady as he read his former colleague his rights. Michelle's phone was still recording in her pocket, capturing the sound of multiple voices calling for justice, of her mother's soothing whispers, of the police chief's commands to arrest Officer Reynolds. In just 10 minutes, the power dynamic had completely shifted. The precinct had become crowded now. News cameras captured the aftermath, their lights illuminating the scattered hair on the floor, the fallen scissors, the look of defeat on Reynolds's face as he was led away. But they also captured something else, the strength of a community coming together, the power of truth prevailing over abuse of authority. As a female officer gently removed Michelle's handcuffs, the police chief approached her family, his face etched with genuine remorse. This incident would become more than just another case of police misconduct. It would become a turning point, a catalyst for real change in the department and the community. The next 10 minutes in the police precinct unfolded like a whirlwind. Michelle's father, still recording with his phone, switched seamlessly between concerned parent and experienced civil rights attorney. His voice carried the weight of years fighting similar battles in courtrooms across the state. "Every second of this has been documented," he announced, holding up not only his phone, but also reaching for Michelle's phone from her pocket, which had captured the entire ordeal from the initial traffic stop. The desk sergeant, already copying security footage to a secure drive, nodded in understanding. The precinct lobby had transformed into a scene of controlled chaos. Officers who had stood by moments before now moved with purpose, securing evidence and taking statements. The young officer who knew Michelle from the community center was carefully collecting the scattered locks of her hair, placing them in evidence bags with trembling hands. Michelle's mother, a pillar of strength in their community, held her daughter close while simultaneously coordinating with community leaders who had arrived at the scene. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from concerned neighbors, local activists, and parents from the library where Michelle volunteered. "Look at me," the police chief said to Officer Reynolds, who now sat handcuffed in a chair, his badge and gun already confiscated. "You've just destroyed everything this department has worked to build with our community." The chief's voice was leveled but carried unmistakable anger. Other officers watched as their leader demonstrated how authority should truly be wielded, with justice and accountability. Outside the precinct, a crowd had gathered. The convenience store manager who had witnessed the initial stop had spread the word, and now dozens of community members stood in solidarity. Among them were teachers from Michelle's school, parents of children she tutored, and even some of her young students, holding hastily made signs declaring justice for Michelle. Inside, a female lieutenant carefully photographed Michelle's partially shaved head, documenting the assault while speaking softly to the teenager. "You're showing incredible strength," she whispered, her professional demeanor briefly cracking to reveal genuine emotion. Michelle's mother stood nearby, wiping tears but maintaining her composure, knowing their response in these moments would set the tone for what was to come. The precinct's internal affairs team arrived within minutes, their faces grim as they reviewed the mounting evidence. Michelle's father presented them with a thumb drive containing videos from witnesses at the traffic stop, all collected through a rapid network of community support. The footage painted a clear picture of escalating abuse of power. "We found these in his locker," an officer announced, emerging from the back with a stack of complaint forms, previous incidents that had been buried, hidden away instead of properly investigated. The police chief's face darkened further as he realized the full scope of Reynolds's misconduct. A young reporter from the local news station had arrived, but instead of rushing to sensationalize the story, she approached Michelle's family with respect. "This needs to be told the right way," she said, understanding the broader implications for the community. Michelle's parents nodded, knowing that their daughter's ordeal could become a catalyst for meaningful change. The precinct's break room had been transformed into a temporary command center. Officers worked phones, reaching out to civil rights organizations and police accountability groups. The chief had already contacted the district attorney's office, expediting the process of filing charges against Reynolds. "Your daughter's phone recording is remarkable," a police technology expert said, reviewing the audio. "She captured everything, every illegal order, every violation of protocol." Michelle's forethought in pressing record, just as her parents had taught her, had created an undeniable record of the truth. Throughout all of this, Michelle sat with quiet dignity, accepting bottles of water and kind words from officers who now surrounded her with support. Her mother had draped a soft scarf around her shoulders, covering the damage to her hair, but Michelle held her head high, understanding that her appearance now told a powerful story about injustice and resilience. The police chief's secretary appeared with preliminary paperwork for filing charges against Reynolds. "We're expediting everything," she explained, her efficient movements belying her obvious emotional investment in seeing justice done. "This won't be buried or delayed." Outside, the crowd had grown larger, but remained peaceful, a testament to the community's commitment to justice through proper channels. Local church leaders had arrived, organizing an impromptu prayer circle. The gathering wasn't just about anger, it was about unity and support. As the evening wore on, more evidence emerged. Officers who had previously stayed quiet about Reynolds' behavior came forward, their consciences finally overriding their reluctance to speak against a fellow officer. Each new statement added to the weight of accountability bearing down on the disgraced officer. In just 10 minutes, a system that too often moved slowly had been shocked into rapid action. The swift response sent a clear message: this time would be different. This time, justice wouldn't wait. Outside, the crowd had grown larger, but remained peaceful, a testament to the community's commitment to justice through proper channels. Local church leaders had arrived, organizing an impromptu prayer circle. The gathering wasn't just about anger, it was about unity and support. As the evening wore on, more evidence emerged. Officers who had previously stayed quiet about Reynolds' behavior came forward, their consciences finally overriding their reluctance to speak against a fellow officer. Each new statement added to the weight of accountability bearing down on the disgraced officer. In just 10 minutes, a system that too often moved slowly had been shocked into rapid action. The swift response sent a clear message: this time would be different. This time, justice wouldn't wait. The convenience store owner who had witnessed the initial stop spoke at a community meeting. "We can't just be angry," he said. "We have to be smart, be organized, and make sure this leads to real change." The crowd nodded, understanding that this moment could become a turning point if they worked together to make it one. 6 months after that fateful night, the community gathered in the renovated community center. The walls were covered with photographs documenting their journey of change, including one powerful image of Michelle standing proud at her high school graduation, her natural hair now regrown into a beautiful crown. The police department had undergone a complete transformation. The new training program, developed with input from community leaders and civil rights experts, was being praised as a model for departments across the country. Officers now spent time volunteering at local schools and community centers, building real relationships with the people they served. "I never wanted to be an activist," Michelle told the gathered crowd, her voice steady and strong. "But sometimes life chooses your path for you." She stood at the podium, addressing a room filled with familiar faces: teachers, police officers, community members, and many young people who saw in her a reason to believe in change. The support group she had started for victims of police misconduct had grown into a powerful advocacy organization. They didn't just offer comfort, they provided legal resources, counseling, and a platform for voices that had too often gone unheard. The youngest member was just 12, the oldest 83, each with their own story, each finding strength in unity. Officer Reynolds' trial had concluded swiftly, resulting in a 5-year prison sentence. But more importantly, it had led to a thorough review of his entire career. Dozens of his previous cases were reopened, bringing long-delayed justice to others who had suffered similar abuse. The blue wall of silence had finally started to crack. The young officer who had called for help that night was now leading the department's new community outreach program. "We're learning to be guardians, not warriors," he explained to a group of new recruits. The change in perspective was visible in everything from their training methods to their daily interactions with citizens. Michelle's father had helped establish a legal clinic at the community center, offering free advice to anyone dealing with civil rights issues. Every Saturday, the waiting room filled with people seeking help, and they found not just legal guidance, but a community ready to support them. The convenience store where it all began had become an unofficial landmark. The owner had framed the security camera footage that captured the initial stop, displaying it alongside news clippings about the changes it sparked. Sometimes, he would tell customers, standing up for what's right starts with just being willing to watch and record. Local schools had updated their curriculum to include discussions about civil rights, community engagement, and the power of peaceful resistance. Michelle often visited classrooms, sharing her story not to spread fear, but to instill hope and empower young people to know their rights and stand up for justice. The police chief had kept his word about reform. Body cameras were now mandatory and always on. Complaint procedures were streamlined and transparent. Monthly community meetings allowed citizens to voice concerns directly to department leadership. Trust was being rebuilt, one interaction at a time. Michelle's mother had turned her experience into a movement, organizing workshops that brought together police officers and community members for honest conversations about race, power, and responsibility. These sessions often started with tension but ended with understanding and sometimes even friendship. The library where Michelle volunteered had created a special section dedicated to civil rights and community advocacy. Children who came for story time now also learned about their rights, their history, and their power to create change. The waiting list for Michelle's reading sessions grew longer each week. National news organizations returned to cover the one-year anniversary, but they found more than just the story of one incident. They found a community that had turned trauma into transformation, anger into action, and fear into hope for the future. The Oversight Committee, now including members from all walks of community life, had become a model for other cities. They didn't just review complaints, they actively worked to prevent them by building bridges between law enforcement and the community they served. Michelle's college essays had evolved from her original drafts into powerful statements about justice and community. She had received acceptance letters from top law schools, each eager to welcome a student who had already demonstrated such commitment to positive change. As she stood at the podium that day, looking out at faces both familiar and new, Michelle concluded her speech with words that would be remembered. "What happened to me was wrong, but what happened after, that was right, that was justice, and most importantly, that was community. Together, we didn't just demand change, we became the change."